And Howard, it's been an interesting opening weekend for you. But before we come to discussing those things, I think we should address the elephant in the room, because a certain Alan Shearer still blames you for losing him his job.
Explain yourself, please, Howard.
Oh, Alan, it's taken 10 years, but, obviously people are talking about acknowledging errors at the moment, and I do have to acknowledge that error. I blame Kevin Nolan.
What happened, Howard?
It was Newcastle, Fulham. By the way, I'm not totally to blame, Alan. I only refereed one of those games that you were in charge for. But Kevin had been standing on the toes of Mark Schwarzer at corners, and I had a word with Kevin, and this corner was awarded, and I saw him do it again, so I stopped it. You see referees blowing the whistle, going in, having a word, and what have you. So I did that, and I said, look, don't do it. Don't stand on his toes. Anyway, so as the corner's coming in, he moves towards Schwarzer, and I just reacted too quickly and blew, and he kind of just stopped short of doing it. And Mark Viduka slammed this shot into the top corner, like majestically, as I'm blowing the whistle, thinking, oh my goodness, I've blown too soon. And no VAR, no opportunity to change it. And I spent the rest of the day thinking, I hope Newcastle come back into this game, and they didn't. And I ended up having to send a player off for a professional foul as well, a dog-so thing. And Newcastle lost. And then I think you went to Villa on the last day, Alan, needing a win or a point, I can't remember, and you didn't obviously get it. And I remember I was down at West Ham on the same day, thinking, coming off the field, thinking, I hope Newcastle have got something out of the game, because otherwise that is going to be, that's going to be pretty significant, that decision to disallow that goal, that beautiful goal.
Do you forgive him, Alan?
Well, we did get relegated, and that goal did cost us a point, and we only got relegated by a point. So, but don't worry, Howard, I don't hold grudges. You're all right.
I didn't realise we could swear. Oh,
you can swear. You can do what you want on it. It's our show. You're forgiven. Thanks for coming on anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, very much so. Howard, I suppose as it's time for kind of admitting mistakes, you did so with one at the weekend. Well, it's actually Monday night, wasn't it? At Manchester United was probably the biggest, most controversial decision at the weekend. You recognised that was a mistake.
Yeah, we did. Obviously, like any club going into a new season, we want to start well. We want to start strong, and we've obviously done a lot of prep work in the pre-season, and we're actually cranking up our VAR training more than ever before as well. So we were actually in the VAR hub on Friday, going through quite a few situations and just trying to drive that consistency. And we have a philosophy about how we use VAR. I think you're familiar with it. It's around VAR not re-refereeing the game, but sitting there to protect against those clear errors, and we saw a clear error on Monday night late in the game. I was actually at the game, and it looked a penalty, honestly speaking, from where I was sitting in the stand, and I expected, when it wasn't given, the referee to go to the screen and have a look at it and give the penalty, and when that didn't happen, obviously it was really disappointing. The VAR looked at it, saw that neither the goalkeeper or the Wolves player made contact with the ball. Dawson headed it back across goal, unhindered at that point by Onana. But then there's that coming together as he saw it between two players who neither got to the ball, but clearly Onana, jumps into the Wolves player and it should have been intervened upon. So when we get those clear errors that happen in the game and we don't rectify those, they make a lot of noise, of course. And, I can sit here and say, we rectify a lot more than we don't, but they're not the ones that make noise. I understand that. So when we get something like Monday night, it does create a bit of damage to the positive direction that we think we're taking overall. We've seen improvements in the last few months in the where we use VAR, but situations like that obviously don't help.
I suppose ultimately you can have VAR forever, and it will correct most things in the right manner, and it will lead to fairer decisions overall. But it still comes down to human decisions, doesn't it? Therefore, what is a clear and obvious mistake to one referee might not be quite so much to another, and it's never going to be perfect, I suppose.
No, that's really valid, that, Gary, because our sport is one which does throw up a lot of situations that split opinion. I mean, there's loads of talk about situations, whether they should or should not have been a penalty. And I've been doing some club visits in the pre-season, so I went to see Luton. I went to see Sheffield United. Obviously, new to the Premier League, new to VAR, at least in Luton's case, not having had it before, having not been in the Premier League before. And I showed the players a situation, a penalty from a game at Nottingham Forest last year. And we knew it was one that would split opinion. It was kind of like one of those that, like, you know, we thought would go 50-50, and it absolutely did. 50% of the players said that's a penalty and 50% said it wasn't. So my challenge is trying to work out how to use VAR in those situations.
But if it's 50-50, you go, if it's a decision like that you think is going to be 50-50, you stick with the referee's decision on the pitch, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely our philosophy, because, you know, if imagine the penalty is given and you're one of the 50% that thinks it's a good decision, and then VAR goes to the screen and overturns it, you're pleasing 50% of the people who didn't think it was a penalty. But if you thought it was, then you think VAR is nonsensical in that situation. And the following week, it's probably the other 50% that feel that way. So within 3-4 weeks, you know, you've kind of like disenfranchised everybody about VAR. We think if we can set expectations around us only intervening when something is clearly wrong, and the skill that we've got to have as VARs is recognising when something is clearly wrong. I mean, Alan, you and I have spoken about this, about talking about clangers, only dealing with clangers. Monday night was a clanger, by the way. So even working to that threshold, we can still get it wrong, because we're working with human beings who are in a pressured situation, looking at something, knowing that they can't take forever to make a decision. And sometimes they just overthink it. And they're trying to be in line with what we're trying to do here, not overly interfering. But sometimes they just miss the mark, like everybody does. We get it right way more than we get it wrong. But of course, I know that an error like Monday is really impactful. You know, that's why I wanted to get to Gary Neal fairly quickly and say, Gary, that's not our standard. We've got to do better than that. In that situation, it should have been a pen. And the officials aren't working this weekend. So we understand there's a need for accountability, because our errors impact somebody else. When we make a mistake, it impacts, in that case, Wolves. If you're the Wolves goalkeeper, you make an error, you're impacting your own team, but our mistakes impact other people. So there's an accountability that we have to show as well, while also keeping the officials confident and feeling like they're able to make decisions and not being afraid to do so by overthinking.
Howard, just a couple of things from that. I'm a huge admirer of you coming out and having the transparency, because we've never had that before, and I think we all appreciate and admire that. But two things from the other evening is, I've read it this week that there's a few people have said now, because the VAR official was less senior than the referee on the pitch. Do you think that sometimes comes into their head, that he's slightly afraid to overrule the bigger name referee or the more experienced referee? And secondly, do you ever foresee the future and think that there is a space for ex-footballers to come in and possibly advise a VAR referee who sat in the hub?
On the first point about the dynamic between the on-field official and the VAR, I think that's a valid point. I think that, and particularly when we first started this VAR sort of journey, I was out in Major League Soccer, putting the programme in there. So similar sort of challenges. We face situations where less senior officials sitting in the VAR chair were kind of reticent to call out an error of a senior colleague who'd been around for a lot longer and was usually refereeing at a higher level. I think that's become less prevalent as we've seen who's good at doing VAR. Some of the less experienced officials are really good at doing VAR, and the on-field officials know that. So we've got to a stage now where somebody like Michael Salisbury, who was the VAR on Monday, that was quite an uncharacteristic error by Michael, because we've seen time and again him do really well. In fact, some of the things we've played out in the past few months have included
Was
Michael.
he not the same official at Spurs Brighton last season?
Yeah, he was. He missed the penalty by the Spurs lad on Matoma. So he's not perfect, but we're using him a lot because we do trust in him. You know, we do believe in him. So and you know, everybody's going to make a mistake, and obviously, you know, if he continues making them, there's an issue. But you know, he's made a couple, but that's outweighed by the good interventions that he's had, and people do generally know that he's good at what he does. So our job is to pick the best VARs and try to pair them off with the officials who they have a good relationship with. So it's not a factor, as you know, we need to minimise that as much as possible. In terms of ex-players, when I first came into this role in December, I did quite a few interviews. You know, you do the media rounds, and I actually mentioned about the fact that, you know, I find it quite incredible that we don't have any ex-players in our group of officials, or any players who have played at a you know, professional level, let's say, you know, National League or above. I think clearly that tells me that refereeing is not something that players, and you guys can speak for yourselves, but find appealing. It's not something you'd fancy doing, but I'm sure there's a way we can change that, and I think we'd really benefit from having some players coming into our ranks. So it's something we're trying to push. It's on us to do that, to make the pathway shorter, to make refereeing seem more appealing, to find a way of getting to players maybe who get injured at 23, 24, or coming to their retirement age at 34, 35.
But not so much ex-players in terms of being referees. I'm talking about ex-players to be sitting in the VAR hub to actually just lend their opinion for rather than you clearing the pathway for them to be referees, them to just sit and lend their experience in the VAR hub and sit with the referees.
Yeah. We've already started taking on board expertise from the playing side of the game. So our coaching director, for example, is Wayne Allison, who played many times in the Football League. So obviously he brings all of his experience. We've also got expertise from outside of our sport. We've got people working with us in the VAR space from Rugby League. In terms of getting the footballers into the VAR hub on a match day to actually give in-game advice or guidance or to steer decisions, that's not possible at the moment. The only people who can actually make the decisions are the VAR and the AVAR. They're match officials making decisions. We don't have anybody else looking over their shoulder telling them what to do, what not to do. We don't think that's appropriate. We want the officials to be on the field making decisions and also in the VAR hub as well. And if we had somebody else influencing that decision, that would be inappropriate, we feel, and FIFA feel the same way. I'd like to have ex-players, though, assisting us, in our training more and more. So, expanding that group of experts that are coming in. We've got some football insights experts that have joined our organisation recently. Chris Kawambi has just joined our organisation, for example, as one of those people. We consult a lot with the PFA and the LMA to get some insights from that part of the game, the most important part of the game. If we could have players, ex-players as VARs, trained as VARs, I would welcome that as an opportunity to look into. At the moment, we're not allowed to do that. They have to be current or former top referees. So the only way we can get them into the chair is get them onto the field as refs, and then get them into the VAR space. And let's see how they would do. But at the moment, we're restricted to only being able to use refs in that particular role. I just want good people who are able to, who know the game, understand the game, able to recognise clear errors consistently, communicate quickly, work as a team in that space. It's a pressurised environment. It's not just like watching TV at home. There's an awful lot that goes into following the process, make sure you don't miss something. A number of times, you'll see a penalty appeal and like the VAR starts looking at that while the game continues live, and then they form an opinion that they need to intervene. But you've got to remember to check the attacking phase of play because there could be an offside in the build-up. And if you forget to do that, then there's a big problem if there was an offside and you've given a penalty. So there's loads of process that we have to go through. But expanding that out to people who've got real lived experience of playing the game, I think would be, in my opinion, really potentially beneficial. If we can get people in through whatever means, then I'd welcome a chance to look at that.
My question would be, in terms of, you mentioned that the pressurized situations, but early when VAR started, everyone was saying it was taking too long. But would you rather not take a little bit longer and get the decision right? You're not in the crowd where the crowd are looking, when the referee goes to the screen, and it can have an effect on how he's feeling in that moment. Say you're away at Old Trafford or Man City or any of the big clubs, but you said you're in a room. Would you rather not just take a little bit more time and get the decision right rather than rushing it and getting it wrong?
Yeah. 100%, Micah. I would never want to sacrifice accuracy for the sake of speed. If we can get both, then we're in the ideal world. If we're not taking too long and we can be accurate, but I would always say to the guys at work in the VAR hub, do the due diligence that you need to do. You can't take shortcuts. You've got to do it properly. You've got to look at the angles that you need to look at. And I don't want them looking at the same angle 7-8 times. That's not something that's clearly wrong if they're having to do that. But they might need to look at 7 different angles once or twice, because it might be the 7th angle that shows you the very clear image that, you guys will show a match of the day because you've got people who are looking for that angle, and we have to find that angle in the moment before it's too late, before the game's restarted. So, yeah, sometimes they need to do that. One of the things that I think is really beneficial of us going out and showing how the process works is that people understand. They understand the camera angles that we've got to look at. They understand why it might take a bit of time, why the referee stood on the field with a finger to the ear, not allowing the restart to happen. We want to be as least interfering as we can be. I want as many goals that are scored to be allowed to stand so people can celebrate, knowing that there's only a really small chance of that goal being taken away. And if it's allowed to stand, it'll be a good goal. The team that's conceded know it's a fair goal. So we want to be really accurate, 100% of the time if that's possible. That's the ambition. But also do it in an efficient way, but never sacrifice the accuracy for the speed. And by the way, just to dispel another myth as well, when the referee goes to the screen, they can absolutely keep their decision if they want to. Sometimes the VAR gets it wrong. They're sitting in this somewhat sterile environment, watching a screen from some distance away from the smell and the feel and the atmosphere of the game. So therefore, they might recommend a review for the referee to go over, and the referee might look at it and say, honestly, I don't know what you're seeing, but there's no expectation based on my feeling of what I saw at the time, the feeling I'm getting from the players, and what I'm seeing now to change that decision. And thanks a lot for recommending the review, but I'm going to keep my call. Now, it shouldn't happen too often if the VARs are good at recognising clear errors, because normally you'd go over and say, yep, that is a clear error, I agree. And I'm going to change it. But they are absolutely entitled to keep their decision if they feel that's the right thing to do.
In terms of the fans, Micah, in terms of the fans, Howard, there's a feeling around the country that sometimes the big clubs, and I think Micah alluded to it slightly, sometimes that the big clubs seem to get their way. Obviously, Manchester United on Monday. I presume you'd absolutely deny there's any truth in that, but that's the question that fans would expect me to ask.
Yeah, and there's that perception. I hear it from fans I speak to. I hear it on radio shows that I listen to as I'm driving around, and also on podcasts like this. But also when I speak to clubs, I sometimes get that leveled at us from clubs that kind of sit outside the traditional top six. I can usually what I do, I end up giving a balanced sort of view, with the clubs that I'm visiting to show things that have gone for and against. And honestly speaking, things generally speaking kind of even out in terms of the things that go for and against. I've seen some situations go for teams that would be considered the bigger ones, and we saw that on Monday night. But equally, I've seen ones go in the favour of teams. I remember, we got some criticism last year for there was a really tough weekend. You remember the one in February, and we had 3 situations in one weekend. One was the Crystal Palace Brighton situation where the lines weren't placed in the right place due to some process errors, and we're trying to ensure that the process is absolutely embedded with our officials through the increased training. The same day, Brentford scored against Arsenal. Norgard was offside, and there was a bit of a complicated check just before that. We were trying to get some lines placed on a possible interfering with the opponent, and then that put pressure on the VAR, sped up through the rest of the attacking phase and missed Norgard coming back from an offside position. And then also the same day, Chelsea felt they should have had a penalty against West Ham. I think it was Souček who went down to his left to try to block a shot with his knee, and it ended up saving it with his hand. It was a good save, but so that was 2 situations that went against 2 of what we would consider the bigger 6, if you like, in Chelsea and Arsenal. So, the stats don't always bear out the perception, but I know the perception exists. And again, one of my biggest sort of challenges is to try to change the way that things are perceived, I think. And the more that I can give, real information that I think is insightful and interesting, then the better, because I think that shows the real picture rather than just what people perceive.
Howard, I know that you yourself or your organisation can't change the laws. You're guided by IFAB. That's correct in what I'm saying, yes? How would you personally like to deliver the handball law? Because I personally feel that's one of the biggest issues in our game, and I think it's most confusing in our game, and I think that's where there's a lot of inconsistency in our game, and that's what angers players, fans, managers, coaches. How would you personally like to see the handball law? How would you like to see it delivered?
It's a really good question, and you saw my reaction when you asked the question. Handball is the most kind of subjective area, the area where we struggle to get the most consistency.
It used to be all right, Howard. It used to be okay, and back in the day, it was used to use a bit of common sense, and if it's, you could tell there was an element of it, whether it's deliberate or not. But now it's got so complex, hasn't it?
Yeah, and we've seen more changes in this part of the law than anywhere else, Gary. Do you know, I think that's the answer. Just go back to allowing the referee to determine if something is a deliberate handball, i.e. has the difficulty is that obviously not every time that, not every handball situation do we see a player moving their hand towards the ball. In fact, it happens rarely, doesn't it? How many times do defenders truly deliberately handle the ball in the penalty area? Most times it's either something they've just flapped it ahead and their arms up, and bizarrely they flick it away with their hand under pressure from an opponent, or they go to block a ball but they put their arms out in a position which kind of does increase the sort of like their body size, and they get an advantage from that because the position of the arm blocks the shot. Even if they were trying to do it with their chest or their leg, they get this advantage from the arms being away from the body. So they've not gone into that challenge thinking, I'm going to try and block this with my arm. You know, the few exceptions would be like the Suarez one in the 2010 World Cup where he flicks it over the bar. They're few and far between.
They're generally trying to get their arms out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why we've got in the situation where we are. The way that the law is written is try to accommodate those situations where players don't mean to do it, but they do. And they get an advantage from doing it. But it's hard. It's hard to judge because what's natural and what's not natural depends on so many different variables, doesn't it? And therefore, I think probably the more kind of extreme the arm positions are, the more credible a penalty decision would be. I don't think we can only say we'll penalise only when players deliberately move their hands to the ball, because that would leave a lot of situations where you guys, I imagine, would say, yeah, that has to be a penalty. Look at the arm position. It's in a really unnatural place. He's got a big advantage from that. So I think moving a little bit away from where we've been recently around too many handball penalties being given, we've tried to ease back a little bit in that respect, allowing the referee to make a judgment as to whether the arm position is really totally unjustified. But I think we're better being in a place where we only penalise when it is totally unjustified. And if it's in the margins, give the benefit of the doubt to the defender, unless you see that movement. What I wouldn't want, and I have heard it mentioned, what I wouldn't want is a situation where we penalise every contact with the arm, simply because I just think that players would start to just drive the ball towards players' arms. I just think that it would be the target rather than the goal. It's probably easier to hit a player's arm than it is to hit the back of the net. So let's drive our shot towards, or our cross towards the defender, and then it'd be a game of dodgeball, wouldn't it? And
Howard, I just want to finish on a point that I think is very important. I think I've experienced a lot of football inside the stadium with VAR, and from a fan's perspective, you do not know what is going on. All you see is a review of so-and-so, and you sit there for 2 minutes and you wait a decision. When do you think it will come that will... I know it started in the Women's World Cup. We've started that slight explanation of a decision at the end, but we need to hear the conversation that goes on between the referee and the VAR, like you get in other sports, cricket, rugby, for example. Is that going to come? Because at the moment, I think it's not fair on the fans, particularly in the stadium.
Yeah, and they're the most important fans of all, Gary, aren't they? With respect to the TV audience, the ones who are in the stadium, creating the atmosphere, the ones that you played in front of and I officiated in front of, that give you that great feeling when you walk out at 5-3. We need to be better in that respect. And it's not been an easy nut to crack, I think, in trying to work out how to communicate, because what's happening at the minute is not enough. We need to do more in stadium. So I think that what we're seeing down in Australia, New Zealand will expand into some domestic leagues as early as the next few weeks. I heard actually only a few days ago that it's not only when they go to the screen that they can make the announcement. They're actually now enable, or towards the back end of the tournament, they allow the officials to speak as well when a check is happening before you actually go to the screen. That's when sometimes you stood there with the finger to the ear to say, we are checking for a possible act of violent conduct by number 6 or a possible offside by number 10 or whatever. So I think that's useful as well. I think that's the direction that most leagues will take. We'll have a conversation with the Premier League and any other leagues that take VAR on. I think the Women's Super League might be taking the VAR system on board at some point soon, and the Football League are looking closely at it. The other aspect is the TV broadcaster. So when I was in MLS, we opened up the broadcast, the audio to broadcast for a few games. We were told not to do that by FIFA until approval had been given. So we set up a working group, and I'm still on this working group that's looking at how we can do that better, because we've got absolutely nothing to hide. We've played it out not live, but we've played it out to the TV audience on shows on Sky and on other channels as well. And we've also done it to the broadcasters behind the scenes. I know some of you guys have been on those calls where we've played the audio to you so you can hear what's being said. So big fans of opening up as much information as possible. An example of that is we've started now running the clock in the stadium beyond 45 and 90 minutes, which is, I think, we're the first league or leagues in the world to do that. I made a phone call and said, look, this is nonsensical. We're holding up 7 minutes on the board. Fans don't know how long beyond 90 minutes has gone. They're whistling from 2 or 3 minutes in. The players are asking how long's left. Just show people, let's treat people in the way they deserve to be treated in terms of the information sharing, so they can see that we've only played 5 minutes. We've got another 2 to go. People understand there's going to be another minute on top of that if we've had a goal or a substitution. So let's just do things right. Let's open up the information and let's bring this game kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Well, Howard, thank you very much for talking to us. And this is an exact example of how things can help towards people's understanding of what VAR is and how referees and how difficult it is. And communication, I think, is really important. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Alan and Micah as well, thank you. And
Thank you.
We'll say goodbye to everyone until the next time.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you.